Welcome back to That's Ancient History. Today I'm joined by a very exciting guest, classicist Jennifer Saint, who has turned her classical education into an incredible career as a writer, and whose latest book, Hera, is the fourth work that retells Greek mythology, following on from Atalanta, Ariadne, and Electra. And I'm so excited to talk about Hera because I feel like, if anything, it's quite new and exciting in the world of Greek mythology to have a book told from the perspective of not just a goddess, but the queen of the gods, who I very rarely see her perspective considered. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. I love the book, so thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Well, I have to start then with that whole sort of conversation about this is obviously not your first time writing a Greek myth. You're very experienced at this point, and you've already written a whole host of incredible novels that have received a lot of praise and are really wonderful. But in a way, this book is also quite different because previously, your characters whose perspective you've been exploring have been mortals or like kind of mortals, whatever we call a sort of like hero or heroine of Greek mythology. But in this case, you're telling the story of a goddess, a being that exists for millennia, who sort of there's no end in sight for her story, who's involved in so much of mythology. And I'm curious as to like, was there a different approach when writing this book? Was it a different experience writing this book? Like, what was different about writing Hera, or was it just the same?
No, it was like you say, completely different. And I wanted it to be completely different. This is, like you said, my fourth book, in 4 years. So,
Yay!
um,
Incredible.
so I was really, really ready to tell a different kind of story. And I think like writing a book is always such a learning curve. It's always a brand new experience. And you take everything from your previous novels, but also it's completely its own book as well. So you feel in so many ways that you are starting from scratch, and it's like the first time all over again. And I just think I was so eager to kind of delve into some of the lesser told parts of Greek mythology. And Hera was a really good opportunity to do that because I was able to go back to Hesiod's Theogony and the very start of the world and the creation of everything and the Titanomachy and all of these kind of really, really ancient stories. And I suppose the thing about writing mythology is that you have this framework, you have this kind of skeleton of the story already existing, and you're putting flesh on the bones. But with Hera, that was so much looser, that framework, because there is no one single arc, there is no one single narrative, there is no ending to her
Yes.
story. Was a really crucial thing. So to kind of take on somebody who is a goddess, who is immortal, who has existed for so long, it was everything I wanted to kind of have a new challenge, to have something different, and just something really, really exciting that felt kind of fresh and brand new all over again.
And it is exciting to read actually. So I loved that about the book, and it was really exciting to read because I do feel like for all the wonderful Greek mythology retellings out there, there are far fewer that seem to be from the perspective of a god or a goddess. And I wonder if perhaps that's something that intimidates people, the concept of writing about a being that lives throughout so much of mythology and is such a big a part of it. But I felt like you handled it so like honestly and so sort of compassionately, and you didn't shy away from the darker parts of Hera's character, and we got, like you say, this really long story with a really long story arc from Titanic. You know, I have multiple classics degrees at this point, the Titanomachy, and all the way up into a sort of like unforeseen, undecided future. And you actually see Hera really grow as a character, which I thought was fascinating because I think you can really almost think of the gods and the goddesses almost quite static sometimes, when really they have a lot of experiences that inform them as who they are as a person. And I wonder, sort of kind of, did you know who Hera was from the very beginning of writing this story, or was this a process of learning how she became the person she was by the end in writing it?
I mean, so probably both, I
Yeah.
would say, because I knew where I wanted to take her story, and I knew my starting point for her is a vase painting of the Gigantomachy, I don't know,
Oh,
let's
yes.
try and pronounce these. um where it's just such an unusual picture of Hera, because we have so many myths about Hera that are effectively the same story, which is
Mhm.
here she comes along, spoiling all of Zeus's enjoyment, and punishing innocent women, and like
Mhm.
we just see this like replayed over and over again, like particularly in like the Metamorphoses, where she is just this relentless antagonistic force who doesn't really change or evolve. But yeah, going back to this vase painting, she's depicted on this. She looks really beautiful and really regal in this long dress. But she's wielding a spear, and this giant is falling backwards in front of her, and she's about to stab him like right in the belly. And it's such a different Hera, kind of so full of life and so fierce and so strong,
Mhm.
um, and kind of taking on a foe a little bit more worthy of her opposition than, a kind of a mortal woman, which is what we see so often. Um, and I really, really wanted to bring that element of Hera out, but like you say, not pretend that the rest of those stories don't exist. So there did seem to be this kind of arc of her development. Kind of, how do you go from that character, from this kind of warrior queen, to this very trapped, domestic, sort of joyless wife, which is what she becomes. And then where do you go after that, which was the part of her story that was more open to me. Because mythology, it just doesn't follow a particularly coherent timeline. And so there was this kind of freedom again to put her story in an order and to actually trace through this pattern. And as well, she gets flattened by this sort of the repetitive nature of here are all these women she's punishing. But it's really interesting to look at the women she doesn't punish, because there are
Yeah.
stories where Zeus inflicts himself on a woman and Hera doesn't retaliate and doesn't respond. And then there are stories where she goes all in. Um, and so figuring out the difference between those adds nuance, adds texture to who she is and why she's making these decisions. And actually, is there something strategic behind her decision making, rather than this spiteful need for vengeance, which is what I think the overwhelming narrative on Hera tends to be.
Yeah, it did feel like you really got inside her head, and there's that balance of like you can sort of really empathize with her in her story arc. Obviously, she suffered her own horrific abuse from Zeus and has been through a lot of tragedy and loss herself. Um, it's never an excuse for what she does, but it just sort of like helps you sort of get inside her and feel more three-dimensional, which was really nice. I felt like you really like saw inside her and brought her to life in a new way, which I really appreciated. I've
Yeah,
never.
and again, I think because she's a goddess as well, she doesn't have to play by mortal rules. So,
No.
um, so that also gives you like a little bit of leeway to interpret her actions. Human beings do not matter to her
Mhm.
the same way that we matter to each other or should matter to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Sort of I imagine when you're writing about a goddess, finding that balance of almost their humanity that we would relate to as a reader, but also bearing in mind that they're just not a human.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if, well, I'm curious if whilst you were sort of writing your previous works, which are more about mortal lives, if the characterization of a lot of these gods sort of started then, because obviously it's not just Hera we're seeing a very rich portrait of. There's Hestia and Hephaestus and Zeus and Demeter, who are all getting layers added to their story. And I wonder if those are the versions of the gods that started when you were writing your previous retellings.
So probably mostly in Atalanta, where
Mm.
Artemis is a major character in Atalanta, and sort of far more so than in Electra, where everything's quite removed from the gods. Um, because Artemis is such an appealing goddess in so many ways, but she's also capable of incredible cruelty and retribution. So having her as this sort of mother figure to Atalanta, but also um like a figure of fear in so many ways as well. I really, really enjoyed that characterization of Artemis in Atalanta, and to see her not as you mentioned the sort of static portrayal of the gods that we get, but to see there's complexity and there's layers, there is um and there's like a reasoning behind the things that they do. Um, because you can see the gods, I guess, as these kind of natural phenomena, as these unpredictable forces that just cause chaos and carnage and havoc. But the gods are also created by human beings, and so they reflect so much of human nature and unrestrained, unbridled human impulses because there's nothing really to keep them in check. And that's who doesn't want to write about a character like that? I think was what really drove me. It's just there's so much opportunity, there's so much potential in really getting into that mindset.
Yeah, yeah, it's very exciting actually, sort of like and almost more freeing than anything else you can write. Obviously in that sense as well, like you said earlier, there's not always just like this one for well, mythology in general obviously has a lot of different versions and it can be very inconsistent and almost incompatible sometimes. But particularly with a goddess, there's much less of like this was her story, this is how she became the spider, or this is how this happened. They're involved in a lot of different things, and I imagine when you're writing a story like Hera, you, as much as you're retelling something, you also have to make a lot of active choices about which direction you take. Like for example, when I went into Hera, I didn't always know what would come because I didn't necessarily know that you would choose to take the version of the myth where Hera is the mother of Typhon, and then that was really
Mhm.
exciting to see that decision and how you fed into it, and even maybe I don't know if I'm reading into this too much, but I wondered if like you went for that direction, but then you still sort of acknowledged, say, like Aeschylus's version where Gaia creates Typhon by sort of giving Gaia a role in Hera's pregnancy. And I'm curious about the process of deciding. Like, do you always know from the beginning of the writing process which avenue or path you're going to take, or does it sometimes just happen organically as you're going, or even change?
Yeah, it definitely does. So I think I know what what I'm going to do. And then you just find that then some choices don't that I thought I was going to make don't actually make sense as
Mm.
the characters become more fleshed out, as the story starts to take this direction. Um, with I knew I wanted to include Typhon because the idea of Hera as the mother of monsters is another just brilliant facet to her. And a great story that I feel like gets lost a lot. Um, and it was all tied into this idea in Greek mythology um of parthenogenesis, of this of create of the ability um to create life, because you've got Hera, a goddess, and you've got Gaia, the kind of the ultimate goddess, the mother goddess, the goddess who's created, like everything has come from Gaia, the whole world is created from Gaia, and her ability to just build life independently. And then something goes wrong, and this isn't just in Greek mythology, this is in wider other religions, other mythologies, where you've got you start with these mother goddesses in kind of more ancient history, more prehistory. And then somehow male gods take this supremacy and take the title of creator and kind of take this ability that is such a uniquely female ability that doesn't make any sense. So Zeus, and I thought it was so You can tell I haven't I haven't quite figured out how I'm talking about this yet.
The
Um,
book's not even out yet as we're discussing this.
so yeah, I think writing so often comes from anger, comes from I am so angry about this. And there's something about Zeus and the birth of Athena that makes me incredibly angry.
And she's motherless. I enjoyed that Athena acknowledged Metis as her mother. That made me really happy.
Yes. Well, that's so crucial to me because it's like it's this warped version. It's like an insult. It's like a kind of twisted appropriation of what belongs to the goddesses that Zeus births Athena out of his forehead. And he can only do it because he has swallowed Metis whole, because he's committed this act of destruction that leads to the creation of Athena. And then he's so pleased with himself. And it was really important to me that Hera can do that and do it properly. That Hera is capable of creating life independently. Um, but you're right that I always want to weave in the other stories. So Gaia's involved, Hera's driving it. But there is this nod to the fact that Gaia came before all of them. And this is if you go back through history, through religion, it starts with goddesses, it starts with women.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And on a like sort of unrelated mythological note, I immediately start thinking about someone like Pandora, who's almost perceived by like Zeus as a punishment on men when sort of female goddesses came first and gave birth. And it's like, why is humanity painted as sort of having men first and then women as the punishment? It's all very dirty.
It is. It's just this horrible misogyny,
Yeah.
and that permeates the very roots of existence and kind of what people believe about the natural order of things. It's this terrible reversal. And
Mhm.
so having Typhon in there, part of the reason was because of that.
Mhm. And it's another reminder as well of how mythology and gods and goddesses are as much a creation of us and our beliefs and how we understand them, and whether they're there or not, we change them and we perceive them and write about them in different ways that then sort of gets warped.
I became so obsessed with that symbiotic relationship
Yeah.
of God create people and then people create gods right
Like the
back.
chicken and the egg. Who came first? The egg, the chicken, the god, or the human?
Mhm, exactly. And then, why do people create a goddess like Hera who is so terrifying, who is such a scourge on humanity? And she's a goddess of women, but she's a goddess who punishes women.
Mm.
I but it does make sense that we kind of create our nightmares, we create the things we're afraid of. Um, and also I think the idea of wish fulfillment as well. I think as much as women might fear Hera, I was also thinking about the women who worship Hera and why do they worship Hera and what do you get from the goddess of marriage? The goddess of wives is such an unhappy wife.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
marriage is such a terrible thing. And is that some kind of consolation to women um I'm thinking of sort of classical Greece and we're thinking about the worship of these gods, women who don't have choice and autonomy in their husbands, women who are probably married to men who behave like Zeus, who are cruel and abusive and unfaithful and humiliating. And so if the queen of all the goddesses is in that same situation, is there some kind of comfort in that? Is
Mm.
there a way that you can reach out to Hera and feel um a solidarity, a kinship, a kind of sisterhood, even though she's so terrifying?
Yeah, yeah. It also just brings it back to that sort of like these myths and these gods and goddesses are never disconnected from the reality of history and human life. Do you sort of because I'm always curious about like obviously people's journeys as like a classicist or just like a straight up Greek mythology nerd. Do you sort of remember one of your first times sort of meeting or encountering Hera in the texts or in the artwork and sort of how you perceived her and whether writing this book changed your perception of her?
I mean, definitely. So it'd be really hard to think of when was the first time
Yeah.
I but a really influential book in my childhood was Roger Lancelin Green's Tale of Troy.
Yeah.
And Hera is like the antagonist for the Trojans. Like she hates the Trojans so much in the Iliad she wants to eat their flesh raw. Which I love. So probably reading that, and I can't remember now to what extent the gods play a role, to what extent Hera plays a role. And so I'm kind of guessing that I might have seen her as quite a frightening figure from that.
Mhm.
And then definitely stories like the story of Echo losing her voice because she crosses Hera. Um, so the sort of merciless side of Hera is was definitely the prominent one for me. And then the Aeneid as well. I'm just thinking A-level classics, reading the Aeneid, and she is so relentless in her pursuit of Aeneas and um so dangerous all the way through that poem. So I definitely didn't see Hera in a very compassionate light. I don't think I read anything that I can remember that would have made me feel much sympathy for her. And even in Ariadne, my first novel, um Hera is the enemy because she's the enemy of Dionysus. She hates Dionysus so much. And so so now I'm thinking, why did I decide to write a book about Hera? Where where did that come from? Um, but it just crept in, I think, just this idea that, well, there must be more to
Mm.
her than just this. And I think kind of delving into those older stories and those lesser known stories, um, just just got me really interested. I know that when I talked about writing this with my agent really early on before I'd started it, and she was really excited about the idea of writing about mythology's baddest bitch, I think she said. Um, so we were definitely coming from the villainess angle,
Mhm.
but you start writing somebody's story and that changes.
Mhm.
Nobody is the villain in their own head.
Mhm. Yeah, no, exactly. But it is quite a unique reading experience because you do find yourself torn between empathy and kind of horror at what happens to and what she does. That it's quite a special reading experience in that like it's not as well. I know who the hero is and I know who I'm rooting for and I know exactly where I want this to go. She's such a complex character that sometimes it's a struggle to decide how you feel about her, but it's almost a better reading experience for that. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, just complicated stories
Yeah.
are the most fascinating ones. And as well, I think so much of our understanding of Hera as a villainess, you think it's colored through the lens of misogyny. We are seeing her through the male gaze always. We are reading her in the male voice. And so she's this curb on Zeus. But Zeus's behavior is so much more terrible than hers.
Yeah. Um, don't get me started on Zeus.
We'll be here forever.
It was really nice as well to see those like sort of moments with Hera, like when she's spending time with her grandchildren, and these sort of really reminders of like she is a woman and she is a person, not a human, but certainly a person with her own story and her own desires and wants and people that she loves, and I also really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the I had the idea of kind of building in her relationship with her sisters early on, and that Hestia would be such a major character in the novel and such an important figure in Hera's life as well, and somebody who can see her in a different way, and the time that she spends under the earth with her grandchildren, it just gives you this totally different version
Mhm.
of who Hera can be and kind of who she is deep inside herself when all those walls are taken down.
Yeah.
Um,
I actually really, I mean, just the inclusion of Hestia made me be really happy too, because she's another sort of figure of Greek mythology that gets quite sort of forgotten, I think, by like pop culture at least. It was nice to see a sort of version of her with all her layers on display in the book as well.
I mean, she's just always been such a favorite character of mine, Hestia. Um, and she's in so few stories. I managed to put all of them in, I think, because there are hardly any. And so there was no kind of filtering to do, for no sort of like teasing out
Mm.
which Hestia story shall I include? Okay, all of them, because there's only like two. Um, but but she's so important. She's so fundamental, like lighting the fire in the home.
Yeah, no, it's such a big deal, and you show that as well in the book, which I thought was wonderful. As you say, you've obviously weaved a lot of different stories together, so I am curious about what your sort of research process looks like. Do you have all the stories you want to address kind of laid out before you jump into things, or are you continuously reading the text as you go and sort of thinking, oh, actually, oh no, wait, no, no, wait, he said he needs to come back, we need to put this in. Yeah, I'm curious about how that goes.
So I definitely start with research. I managed to find this kind of academic book all about Hera. There was not loads about Hera that I
That
could
does
find.
not surprise me.
No, of course it doesn't. But it's this great book, which is I think it's called like the intimate enemy, ultimate spouse, and it's all about her and Zeus and her independently of Zeus. It's really fascinating. It's a Cambridge academic. As I'm peering up to see if I can see it on my shelf. So that was quite dense,
Mm.
and so I spent quite a lot of time with that, combing out all of these um like different facets, different ways of viewing Hera. And that definitely made me think as well, specifically about the way she's worshipped, the shrines that exist to her, what they can tell us about the kind of lead us to speculate about how people felt about her. Um, and then, Hesiod's Theogony. The Iliad gives you such an incredible portrayal of Zeus and Hera's marriage and the very twisted dynamic between them, but how they keep things balanced as well. And sort of the struggling for power, the way that Hera has to manipulate Zeus in the Iliad because he threatens her with outright displays of violence and force and keeps her under control like that. But she still finds a way to get what she wants, which I thought was really, really great. That the Iliad gave me a real basis to build out the rest of their relationship and what their marriage looks like. And so all of that I was kind of doing beforehand and reading beforehand. But what I find then is as I'm writing, it will be the transitions, it will be the sort of, okay, so I know that I'm kind of going from here to there. And now I find myself suddenly like looking at the blank page and going, but how will I get there? And that's when I am like combing through other books or going on theo.com. It's a really great website because you
Yeah.
a list of all the sources so that it can really help to kind of point to, oh, I might go and look at this, I might go and read this. And so then other myths will creep their way in. And I'll just always find things that I'd never come across before. Because there is so much always to discover.
I mean, on that, was there anything that you read about that didn't quite get to make the cut of the novel?
There are so many stories about Hera because she is involved in absolutely everything. So yeah, there were myths that I just couldn't include. I wanted to write so much more about Semele, the mother of Dionysus. That felt like such a loss having to trim her story right down. Because it was so interesting because Dionysus goes down to the underworld and rescues his mother after Hera has caused her brutal premature death. And he brings her back and he makes her a goddess. And I would have loved to have been able to go into how Hera feels about that. But there is just not room on the page. And you sort of have to think, well, are some of these episodes really telling me the same thing about her? Are
Mm.
they giving her the same opportunity for growth as each other? In which case, I can't include them all because
Mhm.
only the nerdiest of people will read the book then.
There could just be like an appendix bonus for everybody who wants it. Not that that bit of work needs to be done. That's a lot of time and effort. Um, the, I mean, that does make me curious as well, though. If, like, sort of in the research process of researching Hera or any of your other books, you start to jot down ideas about what might be next.
Yes, always. I mean, I think it was such hard work, I think, to figure out the geography of Olympus and the physiology of gods and goddesses and the kind, what sort of laws and is does their magic operate by? Because you've got to have a system, and it's not necessarily completely clear in mythology, and things change and myths are told by different people at different times. And so there's not the sort of consistency and the coherence always. So I think I worked so hard to figure out how does Mount Olympus work in my head? How do the Olympians work? What's the kind of hierarchy with the Titans? And what about the monsters and the gods? And how does everything fit together? And how am I going to explain the chronology, which makes no sense. So
You
I've got
did somehow make it feel like it made sense, though. I was impressed.
Um, I had to sketch a family tree, which is going to be in the final version.
Mm.
And I was just staring at this bit of paper, just going, I mean, this is not a tree. This, this does not this doesn't work at all. And my son was coming in because he likes Greek mythology, and he was like, well, that person's married to that person, but it's also their sister. And how are you going to draw that, Mum? Anyway, sorry, that's a diversion. Um, so I was going somewhere with this answer, and now I've forgotten what the question was.
So that
A great point to me as well.
I think it was about like maybe are we going to hear more god and goddess
Yeah,
stories then in Olympus
that's
now
it.
that we have the backdrop?
That's it. Yeah. So I figured it out. So I don't want to let it go to waste.
Mhm.
Yes, I was definitely thinking I would like to stay in the realm of the immortals for my next novel.
I think that's exciting because I mean, as I've repeatedly said, I do feel like there is less stories from the god and goddesses' perspectives than there are from the mortals. And, they're fascinating. And it's obviously a lot of work to kind of figure out how you try and write from the perspective of this almighty being. But when you get it right, it's so exciting to read. Well, I always ask my guests the exact same question at the end of every single episode. And don't worry if it takes you off guard, but I'm always curious just to get a little book recommendation. Obviously, we've talked about Hera and some of your previous novels and some of the ancient sources for this book, but I'd love just a book recommendation, and it doesn't even have to be anything to do with anything we've talked about. It could just be something you read recently, or it can be something ancient Greek. Just anything that comes to your mind, just on the spot.
No, easy, easy. So
Great.
I would really recommend Lilith by Nikki Marmorey, which is the story of Adam's first wife before Eve. And she's got so many parallels with Hera.
Mm.
I think that all the ideas that Nikki explored about the supremacy of mother goddesses, the way that that gets stolen from them, and the way the patriarchy um, appropriates and warps and demonizes female power. All of that is in Lilith. And like I thought that I was taking on a huge scope of time. I think Lilith spans 6,000 years. So similar. So it's really vast in scope, but just I love reading about other religions or other mythologies because I'm so kind of immersed in ancient Greek mythology all the time, that I love to broaden it out and to read, and then you identify all of these patterns and parallels, and you see how history repeats itself, and you see these common themes, that human nature just keeps pushing to the forefront over and over again.
Hmm.
So it's very enraging. It's very beautiful. I would, yeah, massively recommend it.
No, it's just that's so true as well, like the sort of synchronization. And actually, you've just reminded me of a book I read recently, which is called Women's Lore, 4,000 Years. Yeah, because that I think talks a little bit about Lilith, and it sort of shows how sort of a figure of mythology can have so many parallels throughout time in different cultures, and
Yeah,
with the sort of
and
succubus serpent woman.
Yes, I did. I met Sarah Clegg, who wrote that.
Oh,
We did an event together, with Nikita Gill as well,
oh.
in Bradford last summer. And just the way that she explained how these kind of demons associated with infant mortality just ended up becoming the cause of wet dreams. you, you go from this kind of really crucial, important, like concern for women
Mhm.
to like, well, obviously, there's no such thing as a demon with long fingers who causes babies to die. That's ridiculous. But wet
But
dreams, like, that's what we really need to be thinking about here. We've got to figure them out, and make
yeah.
sure that they're not men's fault.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I thought that book was fascinating, and Lilith is on my TBR. I really want to read it. It looks fantastic. Another woman who you don't see a lot of retellings about, but it'd be nice to hear more from her perspective. Oh, no,
Mm.
that's a perfect recommendation. Well, thank you so much, though, for chatting more about Hera. I loved the book, and it was really interesting getting to hear about the writing process and your thoughts on the writing of the book. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you about it.